Welcome to the Basics series. Any of you in the electronics business know what a vital role the capacitor plays in our business. Some confusion exists in the usage of certain SI prefixes with capacitors, namely Nano and Milli. It seems like the SI prefixes are very consistently used in most other aspects of engineering with regard to components and measurements. There is not much hard evidence that I could find that suggests why Nano and Milli are rarely used for capacitor SI prefixes. I believe there are historical and practical reasons why Nano and Milli are rarely used as SI prefixes for capacitors, and I'll share my perspective on this. Here's a full list of the SI prefixes. 4 more were added in 2022. Those and some of the others are way beyond the magnitude of which we use in electronics. I've condensed this list to 8 prefixes that are predominantly used in electronics. Here are the ones that are in the range of capacitor values used with the SI unit F for farad, the unit of capacitance. However, Milli, which is 10 to the minus third, is almost never used, and Nano, which is 10 to the minus ninth, is oftentimes not used. Imagine taking a measurement of 900,000 microamps DC instead of 900 milliamps DC. Or how about measuring noise of 500,000 picovolts RMS as opposed to 500 nanovolts RMS? How weird would it be to not use Nano or Milli in voltage or current values? There are numerous places of confusion regarding the Millifarad. One is the part marking. This is probably the biggest source of confusion. The catalog text of the capacitor's value is another. Also, the marking on the schematic is confusing if Millifarad is used. Let's first look at the part marking. Capacitors used to be marked as MF for microfarad. The reason is the machines that printed the text on the part did not have the Greek mu symbol available for printing. It makes it painfully confusing because MF is the combined SI prefix and unit for millifarads. The only difference is that Milli uses a lowercase m. Capacitors were also marked with MFD for microfarads. This is also easily confused with millifarads. Capacitor manufacturers still use MFD today on most capacitors used in HVAC systems, the start and run capacitors for AC compressors and fan motors. At least they seem to be quite consistent across the HVAC capacitor product line to be marked as MFD. Here's an electrolytic capacitor marked as 68,000 microfarads. It could have been more properly marked as 86 millifarads as far as a strict adherence to the SI prefixes is concerned. Now for catalog text. Here's a series of electrolytic capacitors in a catalog listed in microfarads. This 28,000 microfarad part could have been shown as 28 millifarads. The 960,000 microfarad cap could have been more succinctly documented as 960 millifarads. The 1,500,000 microfarads could have been more adequately documented as 1.5 farads. Now let's look at schematic markings. Here's a schematic of a switching power supply. Those 4 capacitors could have been marked as 1 millifarad each, but again, it could be easily confused with MF for microfarads. Imagine a world where micro existed, but before Nano and Pico, which were adopted in 1960. Pico is 10 to the minus 12th. Well, there really was a Pico 10 to the minus 12th equivalent. It was micro. Micro or mu is 10 to the minus 6th. Micro is 10 to the minus 12th. So micro and pico are equal by definition. It's also often written as MMF for microfarad. This became a necessary prefix for small capacitor values. But there was no equivalent to nano up to that point. I believe this is the reason why nanofarad is less used even today. Let's look at part marking back then. Here is a color code chart for a ubiquitous mica capacitor type from the 1930s that continued being manufactured for decades. Note the capacitance is marked in microfarads and not nanofarads. The square type with the 6 colored dots seem to be the most prevalent. The 3 dots across the top, A, B, and C, are the capacitance significant figures. Black, red, and red is 0, 2, 2. The next dot, D, is the decimal multiplier, so brown is a multiplier of 10. The tolerance dot, E, is gold, so the tolerance is 5%. Dot F is the test voltage, which is brown, and that represents 100 volts. So 220 times 10 to the minus 12th is 220 microfarad, equivalent to 220 picofarad today. Let's look at one more example of the 6-dot mica. Black, green, black is 050. The red multiplier is 100, so that comes out to 5,000. The tolerance dot is gold for 5%. The voltage dot is yellow for 400 volts. The capacitance is 5,000 times 10 to the minus 12th, which equals 5,000 microfarads. This is equal to 5 nanofarads today. I contend that the absence of nano paved the way for capacitor marking in microfarads, or what we today know of as picofarads. Based on that notion, let's take a look at modern-day capacitor markings. They are quite consistently marked as picofarads. Here's a ceramic capacitor marked as 223M. The first 2 digits are the significant figures, and the third digit, 3, is the multiplier's exponent of 10. So 22 times 10 to the third is 22,000 picofarads. This is probably denoted in the datasheet as 0.022 microfarads. M denotes a 20% tolerance. This is equal to 22 nanofarads, but not marked or cataloged as such. Here another example of a film capacitor marked as 104J. That's 10 times 10 to the 4th power, or 100,000 picofarads. This equals 0.1 microfarads and is in the catalog that way. J denotes a 5% tolerance. This could have been properly marked or documented as a 100 nanofarad capacitor. This marking method continues on to ridiculous levels. Here's one marked 106K. That's 10 times 10 to the 6 picofarads, or 10 microfarads. K designates a 10% tolerance. And here's a tantalum capacitor marked 337C. That's 33 times 10 to the 7th picofarads, which equals 330 microfarads. C designates the case size. Now let's look at the catalog text for these items. To follow along with my thought that only microfarads and picofarads are used, here's a clip from a Kemet catalog. The values are in picofarads below 0.1 microfarads, no nanofarads. Here's a similar listing from an AVX catalog. The values are in picofarads below 0.01 microfarads, no nanofarads. In some catalogs, the values are in picofarads below 0.001 microfarads, and again, no nanofarads. Here's a nomograph for doing filter designs out of a 1940 electronics book. Notice the values are microfarad below 0.01 microfarad. The split between microfarads and picofarads was established in textbooks and catalogs way back then. Now let's look at some schematic markings. Back then, and still today, it's common for schematic diagrams to have a note saying that all capacitors are microfarads unless otherwise specified. Capacitors are marked as microfarad or nothing. Here's a 680 microfarad capacitor. It could have been marked 680 picofarad once Pico was established. There are a couple of 0.001 microfarad capacitors. They could have been marked as 1 nanofarad or 1,000 picofarads, but this would have taken up extra space in the schematic. By marking only the capacitors that are less than 0.001 microfarad as microfarad reduces the clutter on the schematic. Here's a more modern schematic from the 1980s that shows low-value capacitors in picofarads with just the letter P. The 0.01 capacitor could have been properly marked as 10 nanofarads, but still, nanofarads were not being used in schematics much. Now let's look at some exceptions. Here's a clip from a modern-day Vichy catalog of film capacitors. They are actually marked in nanofarads, in this case, 470 nanofarads. But strangely, in the catalog table, it's listed as 0.47 microfarads. Here's where it gets even more weird. The composition of the catalog number. The first number in the capacitance value is the multiplier in nanofarads. The number ranges from 2 to 5, and their associated multipliers are 0.1, 1, 10, and 100. The following 2 digits is called the capacitive numerically. So the code 468 is 680 nanofarads. In the example section, 415 in the part number is 10 times 15, which equals 150 nanofarads. But the example says it means 0.15 microfarad. Since the table listing of capacitors is in microfarads, then why not make the part number code in microfarads too? I'll have to say that with all these inconsistencies, the catalog is very clear, and you know what you're going to get. Here's my summary of opinions. Millifarad is rarely used. It's easily confused with microfarad. It seems prudent not to use. Nanofarad is less used. There don't appear to be any confusion that could be caused by using nanofarads completely. It seems unreasonable that an SI prefix adopted in 1960 can't be widely used today. Schematics with all capacitors in microfarads unless otherwise specified can benefit from not using nanofarads and having capacitors below 0.001 microfarad be expressed in picofarads to reduce clutter. I'd love to see your opinions in the comments. Thanks for watching. Please click the like, subscribe, and notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming content.